On today's episode of the Launchpad podcast, we're talking about who's going to be taken in the top 5 of the NBA draft that's coming up in about a month. If the Rockets may engage in any trade down type scenarios, and then we're going to round off the pod with a little bit of Astros talk. So don't go anywhere. We have a great show for y'all. Hello and welcome into the episode of the Launchpad podcast presented by Clutch City Control Room. As always, I am your host, Don Knock. I'm joined by my fellow co-host, Paulo Alves. Of course, you can follow me on Twitter at Don Knock. You can follow the pod at Clutch City CR. If you look in the description there, we have YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify links in the description. We want to thank everyone for pushing us over 825 subscribers on YouTube, I think it is. Incredible work by you guys. Thank you. Thank you everyone who subscribed. If you haven't subscribed yet, again, that's where you can find the links. We're pushing for 1,000 subscribers, so we're getting very close. So if y'all can help us out and get to 1,000, we would be forever grateful. Paulo, tell the people where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, y'all can find me on Twitter at Paulo Alves NBA. That's PAULOALVES NBA. Everything I do from podcasts like this one to live is on Twitter Spaces will find itself linked on there.
And today we are joined, as usual, bi-weekly by our friend from
Rockets Wire, also
There you
Sports
go.
Talk 790, Ben DuBose. What's up, guys?
And he is coming off of an incredible interview with a special guest. If he wants to tease the guest, he can right now. But he's got a podcast
sure.
dropping in
Yeah, it's
the near future.
Marathon Podcast Day. I'm guessing both of these will drop Friday morning. But yeah, I just got done doing a Rockets season in review with Craig Ackerman, also talking about the draft and also about his new partner, Ryan Hollins, with AT&T Sportsnet Southwest. And we actually went into talking about the Twitter Spaces community and stuff that Ryan's done there. So lots of good stuff. We'll be promoting that on the 790 website and also on Rockets Wire. So if y'all want to listen, please do. It'll be available, guessing Friday morning, Friday midday, something like that.
Yeah, definitely gonna check that out. Once everyone's listened to this one, of course.
Of course.
Gotta get that in there. But no, I'm sure it's gonna be a great podcast. I'm definitely looking forward to listening to that too over the weekend. But we have a lot of exciting news, as I'm sure most of y'all who haven't been, in a medically induced coma or sleeping for the last couple of days are probably aware of by now. The Rockets have a new draft pick, number 3. There it is. Had to get that in there for the YouTube audience. Ben, you are our esteemed guest. We're going to let you go first. How did you feel when that card came out and you saw that the Rockets got pick number 3?
Well, not as good as when I saw the Pistons at 5 and the Kings at 4. Of course, when you see your card that's not at 1, you're always like, well, why couldn't we have been a spot or 2 higher? But honestly, this is a really good result for the Rockets. I crunched the numbers to be top 2 last year and top 3 this year. You combine the odds. Last year, they were in the top 27% of results based on their probabilities. This year, they're in the top 40% of results. Combine those 27% shot and 40% shot, the Rockets had an 11% chance to get, a top 2 last year and a top 3 this year. So all in all, that's a really good, just from a math probability standpoint, it can go any direction and you're in the 11% instead of the 89. That's really freaking good. Especially
I have to let you know. I have to let you know that I'm legally obligated to not do math on this podcast. So I just want to, remind everyone of that. So I'm glad you did the math, because if you asked me to do it, I would have had to pass that off.
Especially when you consider they could have had a 48% chance, or did have a 48% chance last year, of falling to 18 and having probably your best prospect being like Trey Mann, or I guess they could have still traded up for Şengün, but the point is, you'd be nowhere near the position you are now, and that was a much more likely scenario than what the Rockets got. And ultimately, we'll talk on this podcast, and we'll talk for the next month plus about what they can potentially do with pick 3. I don't think it's 100% given that they're going to take, whichever of the 3 bigs, Banchero, Jabari Smith, and Chet Holmgren that's left, but that's probably the odds-on favorite scenario. The bottom line is that being at 3, you at least have the option. You have the option to go big, and, if your scouting process leads you to someone like Jaden Ivey or Shaden Sharp, then at least, you're making the choice, and the choice isn't being made for you by other guys or other teams in front of you deciding to go a certain direction. And if you want, Ivy or Sharp, perhaps you can trade down a spot or two and still get that. So there's just so much optionality that comes with pick 3. My guess is that they keep it and get whoever's left. Probably the most likely scenario, and it'll make Paolo happy, is that Paolo Banchero, the destiny has finally arrived, and he joins his good buddy Jalen Green with the Rockets. That's my odds on, when I saw they're picking at 3, that was what popped into my mind immediately. But the bottom line is that in a draft where there's a top 3 and there's a top 5. We knew they were going to be in the top 5. Now they're in the top 3. They're in the top tier of the top tier. And at this point, while it's not perfect, it's a pretty good position to be in.
Yeah, that 18 pick last year, that's got to be the darkest timeline. Thankfully, we're not having to live that one out. In the multiverse, we went a much better route, but I was very pleased with the result as well. I mentioned this in the space we did, but it was disappointing to me. The one part of it that was disappointing was to see the Thunder come right in front of us because, we have the little rivalry going with the Thunder. All the Thunder fans were like, oh, Giddey should have made a first team over Jalen Green. So that, popped back off last night on the timeline. But just generally, other than that, it's a very exciting result. Like you mentioned, Paolo and myself have been very big Paolo pushers, if you will. And this puts us in a pretty good place. Sorry, there's a lot of P's in that phrase. I don't know how that just worked out that way. But it puts us in a pretty good position to get Banchero if he were to fall. I do want to mention, this was talked about on Kevin O'Connor's podcast with Chris Vernon. Vernon actually mentioned it. If there's a team that may, do something kind of crazy, right, and do something kind of out of the ordinary, it's probably going to be the Thunder. Historically, the Thunder have been a team that, Westbrook wasn't really the consensus pick there. Harden really wasn't the consensus pick there. Steven Adams really wasn't the consensus pick there. And they named off a couple other ones on that show. If people want to go check that one out, they can. But that's been the team historically that, may not just go with the flow of what everyone else is doing. So having the Rockets be right behind that, obviously you're gonna have to plan for different scenarios that may happen because it may not be chalk, and it may be chalk, right? We just don't know. Troy Weaver is usually the guy that's kind of attributed to some of the really athleticism based picks in that Thunder front office, and now obviously he's over in Detroit, so that's not really being brought into the equation at this time, but we'll see what it looks like with Presti drafting with this high of a pick again for the first time without Weaver. So I did want to get that in there.
And by the way, on the subject of, Jalen and the all rookie team, and I think it potentially ties into, or at least the logic of it, to the draft dynamic with OKC at 2. One of the interesting things the last few weeks, it feels like Twitter almost talked themselves into it. I think it felt, the outrage last night certainly felt like it, that Herb Jones was going to be on there ahead of Jalen just because that's what the majority of Twitter thought. It's almost like you say something enough and you try and talk it into reality. And of course, what ended up happening, the voters had a very different opinion. Not only did Jalen get on the first team, it really wasn't even all that close. Jalen had 58 first team votes. Jones had 32. Giddey had 24. And I think a lot of that same dynamic may be present the next few weeks in the draft discussions. You're going to have a lot of people, especially the fan bases, who coalesce around the same way we did around Green a year ago. We'll see what the Thunder think it too. But the one thing about the Thunder in particular and Sam Presti, he is entrenched enough. He is not going to fall victim to groupthink. A lot of younger GMs, they might err on the side of conventional wisdom because if things go wrong, they want to say that, hey, at least I wasn't on an island. If I miss on this, it's the same way that everybody else missed. With Sam Presti, he's established enough. He is not going to hesitate. If he thinks Jaden Ivey is the best prospect at number 2, he's going to take Jaden Ivey, even though he has Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Now, I'm not predicting that. I'm just saying he is going to do what he thinks is best for them. And I think OKC in particular, because it's so tough to attract a star to that market, they have to gamble even more on the side of upside because it's really, really tough for them to get a star otherwise. And we saw last year, even the odds are in their favor. They didn't get higher than number 6 in the draft, and they tried to trade up but couldn't then. So that could factor into what they're going to do. But I also think it's just sort of a cautionary tale. And I think the all rookie is, just sort of leads into some of what we see on social media, which is, you say something enough, people just sort of convince themselves that it's the reality, when sometimes all you're just hearing is an echo chamber. It's the same thing said over and over again, and it feels like there's some substance to it, but that may not actually be the case. And so that's where I think you may see a common theme with the draft. You may see, we'll see if the Magic take Chet. If they do OKC fans coalesce around Paolo? Do they coalesce around Jabari Smith? Whoever it may be. But in reality, Sam Presti is going to be a wild card, and that's why, from a Rockets perspective, that's the one downside. I'd love for some other team other than OKC to be at number 2, not so much because of the fans, but more just because Sam Presti will take this down to the wire, and you will not know what they're going to do until their card is in on draft night.
Yep, absolutely, man. My y'all saw my instant reaction. I recorded it live, but I just can't stop thinking. There is a 25% chance. The most likely scenario is that we get 18 last year, dropping to 5, and 5 this year again. And what that means is, well, you didn't get it for franchise cornerstone last year, and this year you're also probably not going to get one at 5. And instead, we got top 2 last year, which was within the top tier, which was the top 3, and this year again the top 3 is the top tier, and we got that again. I went and looked, and since the Lakers and the Celtics picked back to back in the top 2 or top 3, and that was 6 years ago. In the last 5 years,
it was Lonzo and Ingram, and then Tatum and Brown, or Tatum and who's the other one? Was it Brown? I don't think it was Brown.
No, it was Tatum and Brown. Yeah,
it was Tatum and Brown. Okay.
So 2016 and 2017 was Philly, LAL, Boston both times. I mean, even the top 4 was the same. Phoenix was 4th both times. But since then,
aggressive tankers. Well, I guess Boston didn't tank because they had Brooklyn's pick.
Right.
So since then, so the last 5 years, there's no team with 2 top 3 picks in a row. Not a single one. Even not back to back, even just in general, there's no team with 2 top 3 picks, and we got them back to back in this really shallow window that we have of 3 years, where we are indeed tanking, or we will be one of the worst teams in the league. So we got incredibly lucky, like unprecedented luck since the lottery odds changed. So we were just incredibly blessed because of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And yeah, that was my main thing. I reacted to pick 5, and I was like, okay, nice, let's go. One more. They went to break, they came back, saw the Kings, was completely relieved. I was like, okay, I don't care anymore. Just from now on, like, I got what I absolutely wanted. From now on, it's all bonus. I'll be insanely happy with any result from here on out. They got 3.
Yeah, for sure. When we were at the live watch party over at Urban South, when 5 came out, everyone was super happy, and then when 4 came out as well, everyone was just incredibly happy.
Those videos were awesome, by the way.
A friend of the show, J Dub, decided he was going to run out of the room, in elation. But let's shift gears a little bit now. What we're going to do with the rest of this segment is we're going to go through and say who we think is going to be in the top 5. I think we're going to go ahead and do it by order. Obviously, we know the order now. So do y'all want to rotate, or do y'all want to go?
Well, what I was going to propose, and we can do this rapid fire and then explain, because who you have going at 3 is contingent on who you have going at 2, and so it's going to be tough to sort of keep track if we have different opinions. So I say we each go rapid fire, and you guys can start 1 through 5, and then we can talk about why after.
Yep. I agree with that.
So everyone's going to go 1 through 5. Individually, and then we'll discuss.
Yeah, and this is assuming no trades. This exercise is assuming that the draft order stays as is. Paolo, you want to go first?
Okay. Yeah, I'll go first. We've had no certainty.
Let me make a little chart real quick.
Let me run the lottery and do this again. Nah, I'm joking.
You're having PTSD. You're having PTSD, my friend.
No explanations, rapid fire, and then we'll explain. We'll get into the analysis after.
I got Chet 1, Jabari 2, Paulo 3. Ivy 4, and Shade Sharp 5. Yeah, I'm gonna be cookie cutter. That's my prediction.
Okay. All right. You want me to go second?
Yep.
I will go. I'm gonna go Chet. I'm gonna go Chet first. And then what do I think OKC is going to do? I think I gave the big OKC may do something crazy in the intro, so now I'm going to have to pick that they do something crazy here. I'm going to say that OKC picks Shaden Sharp, At 2, Brad will be very happy when he listens to this. He's been pushing Sharp propaganda virtually by himself. And I'm going to say the Rockets still go Paulo. And then that lets the Kings pick Jabari. And then Ivy, I'll still say Ivy goes 5.
Okay, so I'm sort
Given
of
no
on the same
trades.
wavelength, but I'm going to make both of y'all unhappy. I'm going to say the Magic take Chet, although I'm hoping they take Jabari. And I think it's possible. But I'm going to err on the side of the Magic taking Chet because I think there is a connection between Chet and Jalen Suggs going back to their Gonzaga days in AAU. Then Thunder taking Paolo, Rockets taking Jabari, Kings taking Ivy, and Pistons. Boy, it's close between Sharp and Murray, but I'll go Sharp based on upside. And the reason that I'm, and hopefully it's Sharp, because if it's Sharp, that gives the Rockets even more options in this scenario. You'd have 2 of the premium 3 bigs, the scenario that you threw out, Don, and you'd have both Paolo and Jabari available to the Rockets. But I just feel like the more I look at OKC's situation, it is so tough for them to get legitimate star players to Oklahoma City that I'm having a really tough time seeing them take Jabari Smith, because even with all their future draft capital, it is so hard with the new lottery odds. Look at last year when they had the deck stacked, they were thinking they might have 2 top 5 picks. They had 0. And if you're OKC, I think you have got to err on the side, now that you have a number 2 overall pick, of someone that has star upside. I think they would take Chet if he's there, but in this scenario, it sounds like we're thinking Chet to the Magic. And at that point, I could see Paolo or Sharp being ahead of Jabari simply because I think Jabari has less true star upside. Now, Sam Presti could come to a different conclusion. That's just based on my gut feel. And if that's the case, I'm fine with it for the Rockets, because I do think, the Rockets, the Houston market, and the fact they already have Jalen, I think makes Houston, I'd still gamble on the star upside of Banchero if he's there. But if he's not, I don't think Houston 100% has to get a star out of this draft with the market and Jalen. If you have, a super high floor guy, which I think Jabari is, you can live with that. You're fine. But that's why, it sounds like we're sort of on the same wavelength. I just have a tough time seeing OKC take Jabari, just because to me, he seems to have the clearest ceiling among the top 4, maybe even top 5, because I'm starting to come around on Ivy too. So I just think that OKC at 2 is going to do something a little unorthodox if Chet is off the board, and maybe it's Paolo, maybe it's Sharp. Maybe it's Ivy, although I doubt it. They'd have to absolutely love Ivy, considering the 2 building blocks they have, SGA and Giddey, are both guards. But again, it's Sam Presti, you never know. And then Houston, I think the safe bet is Rockets taking whichever of the 3 bigs is still on the board, unless Don's scenario, there's both of them. And then, once you get to 4 and 5, Ivy and Sharp are the highest upside guys available. Outside chance, Keegan Murray, because he's so steady, such a high floor. But I'll say upside wins out.
I'll give you. So my counter here. So first of all, the last thing that you said, I think another guy that has an outside chance is if it's the Pistons picking 5, if they don't trade up, I think Duran has a chance there. I think they might fall in love with him as a pick and roll partner for K. They have been playing undersized Isaiah Stewart there for 2 years now. I think that, and they might fall in love with the upside there. That being said, the top 3, the way I look at it is, first pick, I think it's Paulo or Chet for the Magic here. And I think they go Chet because of the Suggs connection, because it's pretty much one of the player that fits their draft profile the most. It's a defensive big / wing who's really lengthy, who has an anomaly body type. I think they've shown that they like those kinds of players with Mo Bamba, with Jonathan Isaac, going all the way back to Dwight Howard.
Can I interject there real quick? Because we were in the space yesterday, and that was being brought up. The exact point you just made was being brought up, and I was thinking about it because obviously from the time they drafted Dwight Howard until now, it's not the same general manager, right? And so I was like, let me go back and look who their general manager actually is and how long he's been there, so that way we know what he's done in that time. I looked back, and their general manager is Hammond, John Hammond, I think is his name. He's the guy that was in Milwaukee when they were trying to go to the pterodactyl lineup where they drafted like Thon Maker, Giannis, I think Middleton. They drafted just all these super crazy length guys. And I was like, okay, if that's what this general manager is coming from, where it's like, I just want to put a bunch of super freaky length guys on the floor, and like you presented, right? They already have a bunch of guys that do have length, like Isaac and Mo Bamba and whatever the case may be. I don't think that's going to stop him from drafting Chet. I think you could see him being interested in some sort of Cavaliers type of situation, right? Where they're playing three really lengthy guys all together. And if there was a situation where it's like, hey, Chet may play down at the three, right? I could see Orlando being the place because of who their general manager is. So I just wanted to get that in there because I wasn't able to get it in on the space yesterday. I kind of got ran over.
To me, the other thing that fits that as well is they have a perfect situation. They have Franz Wagner at the 3, who's a good defender, and they have Wendell Carter Jr. at the 5, who can kill Chet from some of those matchups that we're scared about, the Embiids, those bully ball picks. I think that's a really good fit there. And then the Sucks connection is just too obvious. It's just meant to be. This is the one I feel more comfortable about. I don't think they take Jabari. I think these two non-star upside for them. I think the reasoning behind taking Paulo for them is if they want to swing for a primary creator, which they might not have. It might also be that they don't want to have one and they want to play more team ball with Jalen Suggs and all of these guys that can sort of do it, but not do it all the time. There's also the argument that Chet could be that guy. He just wasn't used that way. The Thunder then, I just can't see the Thunder taking Paulo. I think, first of all, I think Paulo doesn't want to go there. I would not be surprised at all if, and it's not even for that reason. I would not be surprised at all if Paulo just prefers the Rockets because of who's on the Rockets, because who's the GM, who are the players, who like
living in Houston versus living in Oklahoma City.
Yes,
exactly.
By the way, that is a very crucial thing that I think a lot of people aren't talking enough about. A lot of these draft picks can sort of steer their way, not entirely, but you can choose who you work out with, who you talk with, and who you don't. We saw that before the draft last year, and it was clear that Jalen Green's camp was sort of angling their way for Houston, Evan Mobley's camp seemingly for Cleveland. I don't want to say that that's going to make the decision by itself, but it can have a role. And not only is Houston a much bigger city than any of the others in the top 5, Orlando, OKC, Sacramento, Detroit, it's bigger, it's more desirable, but also you can make a lot more money with your endorsements, your shoe contracts, playing with Jalen Green in Houston, a clear borderline top 5 market, definitely a top 10 NBA market, versus the potential of your off-court earnings in places like Orlando or OKC. It's a big difference. So potentially that is something that could work to benefit the Rockets.
Yep, and I feel like Banchero, just what the little we know about them, would be the guy that would care more about that. He also has more ties with Houston than he does with OKC. So I think he might lean one way, and we know how insecure the Thunder as franchise in general are to guys that don't want to be there. We know how many guys have left. And they might want to, and then even from a straight draft perspective, they drafted Giddey, which is more of the Banchero archetype than he is a Jabari Smith archetype. That being said, Giddey's absolutely useless if he doesn't have the ball in his hands right now. He's not a good defender. He's not a good shooter. He can't play off the ball. So, yes, they could go for the star, but with Shea also coming out in interviews recently saying he wants to be the point guard, he doesn't want to be playing off the ball, I think it's a more immediate need, or it will be too many cooks in the kitchen too soon.
Fair.
And then Jabari just brings something that they don't have. They don't have an elite shooter, and they need that if KD is going to be playing. And it just doesn't make much sense to me, at least, that they draft Paulo, because it's just more of the skill set that they already have. That being said, if they believe Paulo is the better player, they will take it, because I don't think they care about PPA whatsoever. They might take Sharp. It's OKC. They might even take, I don't know, like Jalen Duran or something like that. It's OKC. You never know. Also, another thing I wanted to mention, if they were looking for a star last year, I would say they would probably would have went with Kuminga, and they didn't. They went for this Giddey, who, I mean, I would argue even coming out of the draft that Kuminga had more star potential than.
Yeah.
I think Kuminga was very volatile star potential.
The only pushback that I would say to that is it's a little bit different when you're at 2 than when you're at 6. When you're at 6, inherently a little bit less likely that you're going to get a star. Whereas at
Yeah.
2, you almost feel like it's so tough to get that high in the lottery. You feel like you've got to. But yeah, I see your point on Jabari filling a role if they don't have, and that's fair. And there are people that think that Jabari can have a star impact, even if I'm not one of them. I still like him. Don't get me
Good friend
wrong.
of the show, Dave. Clutch fans. If
Yeah,
you haven't seen his timeline, he
yeah.
is
No, I still really
very
like him as a
high
prospect.
belief
Just see
that
the upside.
Jabari can have a star upside.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Paolo. I mean, the fit is not ideal, but it's just Paolo's ability to be sort of an offensive anchor and sort of create gives you the type of guy that, especially the alpha engines type, that can be very tough in my opinion to get to OKC. So I mean, it's not an ideal fit. I agree. It's just why I wouldn't write it off.
Yep.
And just covering mine a little bit, right? Like all the reasons y'all outlined for Chet to Orlando make a lot of sense for me. Sharp to OKC, kind of what we talked about earlier on. I think if there's anyone that's going to do something kind of, wonky, I think it could be them. Sharp just pulled out of the combine, so we're not going to see him in 5-on-5s. We're not going to hear much about his interviews and things like that. He did get measured. His measurements came back a little interesting. He was a little bit shorter than most people thought, but the wingspan was very
It's
good.
crazy.
So
yeah, like barely
obviously,
over 6'5" height, but the wingspan's almost 7 feet. So
yeah,
it's still damn good.
So that kind of a wash on that. His athleticism is obviously very good. We saw the video of him almost touching his head on the rim. And like I mentioned earlier, historically the Thunder have really liked guys that have a lot of athleticism, can do some playmaking. I think that's something that he can tap into, but he doesn't necessarily have to. Like you mentioned, they have Giddey and then they have Shea, so he doesn't have to be a super active playmaker, but he has the potential to, grow in that area of his game. And I do think there is some star level upside there. Like Paulo mentioned, they need to kind of take a big swing here because at the top, as much star upside as Paulo has, I think Sharp has considerable level of star upside as well. Just the way he can create with his footwork, the way he gets shots off the dribble. I think there's a lot there in terms of being a primary scoring option in a way that Josh Giddey is just probably never going to be. So I think in that sense, he's a good fit alongside with what they want to do there. So, definitely a hot takey prediction. But again, if there's a team that I think would do something kind of wonky, kind of crazy, it would be the Thunder. To the Rockets pick, I've been on the Paolo train for a long time. If they want to take Jabari here, then like we mentioned, they would have that option to do so. And I would be pleased with either one of those guys. We've had our sparring matches with Dave. We've had a kind of back and forth with some of the other Jabari people. But at the end of the day, I think there's a lot to be happy about if you get Jabari. I am not someone that believes in his handle development. I think, he does have some limited creation upside because he's not someone that's really aggressive in attacking the rim. More so than the actual shot creation elements itself. It just seems like he just doesn't play the game getting downhill and getting to the rim. And for someone of his size, it's kind of strange to see on tape. But that's my one reservation with Jabari. The rest of his game, I think, is great, and I think it will all translate fairly quickly. And then Ivy to Detroit. I think that Ivy is an interesting person to pair alongside Cade because Ivy's playmaking is kind of up in the air, but Detroit could use some athleticism at the guard position, and he shoots a bunch of deep threes and is able to get to the rim as well. So not a lot of mid-range game, but Cade can kind of fill in some of the mid-range game there. And I think they'd be able to have that pairing for a long time. And as I mentioned earlier, Troy Weaver is now the general manager in Detroit and someone that, as I mentioned, likes a lot of athleticism, and Ivy has tons of that. But we've ran a little bit long on our first segment. I'm sure no one's going to be disappointed in that with, how excited everyone has been coming off the draft lottery. So we're going to go to break. When we come back, we're going to talk a little bit about trade down or trade up scenarios. So don't go anywhere. We will be right back. And continuing on into our second segment here on the Launchpad podcast with our special guest, Ben DuBose of Rockets Wire. We just talked about the top 5 pick that the Rockets thankfully got in Tuesday's draft lottery. Now we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about potentially trading that pick, whether that be trading it up or trading it down. I think a lot of people came into this pick already having a guy in mind. You had 3 guys really at the top. Some people were Ivy people, but those were a little bit, we'll say, fewer and farther between just because of the roster construction of the Rockets currently.
Hmm.
But like I said, a lot of people kind of already had their guy coming in, and the Chet cadre, whatever you want to call them, they are kind of the ones on the out. And it seems like the Jabari people, the Paolo people, are really the ones that think that, my guy may still be here. Mostly Paolo. It seems that a lot of the consensus is that Jabari is going to go in the first two. But if people aren't comfortable taking Paolo, a friend of the show, Nathan Fogg, he's been one of the people that's been kind of already out there about, maybe we should just trade down. And I think whether or not GM Rafael Stone decides to actually trade down, I think one, he does need to listen to the offers, because if you just get some sort of, home run knocking out of the park type of offer, I mean, you're gonna have to take that just because for an asset play standpoint, you have to do it. But Paolo, we're going to go over to you first. Do you see any really obvious trade up or trade down situations here, or would you be comfortable with doing any of them if you don't see like an obvious one?
The way I see it, unless they have a clear number one that they think will go first, there's no real. There's like, I don't think they should trade 2-1. I think if they are with consensus and they are all within the same tier and they all would fit the Rockets pretty perfectly, they have a hole at that position, then just take whoever is left there. I don't think it would be worth the premium assets to move up. I also don't think anybody would want to move. I mean, I guess for the same logic, but in reverse, some people might be trying to move down if they have all three the same tier. They just like, oh, give me the extra asset and I'll take whoever's left. But I think it will depend on how much they value getting their pick, like out of the top three. Then trading down, I guess it depends how they feel about all of them. Because the way I see it, I think there's a clear like gap in but below the top three. But I'm not sure every team feels this way. So it would take a team thinking that there's a clear gap there that's worth a valuable asset for them to want to trade up. And it would take the Rockets not thinking there's a gap that big for them to trade down, because I think what the Rockets are trying to do is consolidate assets rather than breaking one big asset into many pieces. Just because of how many young players they already have, they're going to struggle with roster spots, they're going to struggle with giving everybody playing time. So from that perspective, I think it's going to be tough. The one thing I could see, and this is gonna sound like I'm a Jabari hater, is, well, Jabari is, if you don't buy, let's say you don't buy shot creation, he will be a really elite 3-and-D wing. If you think to a lesser extent, I don't know, Keegan Murray can be that. If you think to a lesser extent one of these other guys, like if you only view Jabari as a really good role player, then you could sell yourself on some of these other guys also becoming that, or you could sell yourself on taking a bigger gamble and going with one of the guards, right? That would, I think, between the two guards, I would probably want Sharp more if I'm the Rockets, just because, yeah, and if he is going to get in workouts, just because you can just play him at the three. More than likely, he is bigger than Jalen Green when it comes to like how big his body is. Like he's thicker, I would say. So, and he has the larger wingspan. So you could probably play him at the three for now. If you think he has that upside, I think there might be a world where that's the case. But I think if Powell falls, your pick's for upside anyways. And if Powell's the one falling, then I think he has the higher upside compared to the other two guys. So in that sense, I would struggle more to see it. And this probably sounds biased because I have Paulo as my favorite one. But and I think if for some reason Chet falls, then no, please do not trade down, because I think those other two guys don't like. Chet's so unique that I don't think it would be worth it to trade down unless there's someone. And it always comes down to what other teams value compared to what
Hmm.
you are valuing. And I mean, I guess if some teams are absolutely crazy about Chet, if the Pistons are like, give us Chet and I'll give you pick 5 and or pick unprotected next year, and I'm like, okay, sure, take Chet. Like, doesn't make much sense. But unless it's something like that, I would struggle to see it.
Yeah, I would say that it's not likely, but the fact that they're at 3 it makes it the trade possibility at least a little more interesting, because if they're on the other end, either end of the extreme, 1 or 5, at 1, you've got your choice. And then if you're at 5, the floor scenario, then, I really don't think you're going to be looking to trade down, because we talked about, there's definitely a cutoff after 5 when it comes to guys that could potentially be all-stars out of this draft. But at 3, because you could potentially move up or down and still get one of that 5, that group of 5, then at least it's interesting. The reason I could see them looking at a move up is only because OKC, as we talked about, is unpredictable, and if OKC is looking at a Sharp or a Jaden Ivey, someone in that tier, then they could say, you know what, why don't I move down a spot or 2 and get an extra asset? We know OKC is not afraid of having too many assets. We saw last year, they already had all those future picks, and they dealt the pick that was Şengün to the Rockets for 2 protected ones from Detroit and Washington. So Sam Presti is never going to turn down assets if he thinks they're available to better him. So be it Chet, be it Paolo, be it Jabari, if the Rockets really want someone at 2 that the Thunder are sort of meh about, or if the Thunder just come to a conclusion that, hey, our board is different than the consensus and we want someone like Sharp or Ivy, that I could see them looking to the Rockets to trade down. And there is a relationship between Stone and Presti. They've dealt together on draft day last year to where something could come together relatively quickly. And as we talked about for a while, if the Rockets think that they can get their guy, this is a consolidation year. Their window is very short in terms of this rebuild. So if they think they can get their guy, they're not going to hesitate to give up one extra pick. Paolo, I know you had your hand up.
Breaking news: Jonathan Fagan has just reported that the Rockets got a workout with Tari Eason, and they have scheduled one for him to come back and work out in Houston after the combine. So that's
okay.
He's been a guy that's been falling a lot.
But the quote is, "We had a really good conversation. A really good conversation." It's interesting.
So, I'm a big Tari Eason guy, so this is good news for me.
Yeah, definitely. And the other scenario, to jump back into our trade up, trade down, I don't think they'll trade down, but if you really like Ivy or Sharp and see them as having those upsides, sort of the same logic as the Thunder, why not move down and get up and get an extra asset? Now, do I think the Rockets are necessarily looking for extra assets? Not really, but if you get that extra asset, then maybe it makes it all the easier to trade up from 17 a few spots to get the guy that you really want around. Well, we've talked about like 12, 13, but I don't know, maybe you can get up to like the Portland pick at 7 if you combine it with guys like Christian or Jay Sean, someone that's a established player in your current roster that might help Portland, who's in a clearly win now scenario. Maybe you can get all the way up to 7. But that's sort of the trade down scenario. If you really like Ivy or Sharp, then why not move down a spot or 2 and pick up one more asset that you could then combine with a subsequent move up with from pick 17. All in all, I think the Rockets stay. I think there's just too many options, and I think at 3 they're positioned to have a good option no matter what OKC and Orlando do. But with them being in the middle of that 5-person tier, and again, me personally, I think there's a top 3 within that tier, those 3 bigs of Paolo and Jabari. But you can make a reasonable argument for Ivy and Sharp still having all-star upside, and if that's ultimately what the Rockets conclude, then yeah, there are scenarios, and I would just say the common denominator to all of this, the thing that ties all of it together, is the unpredictability of the Thunder. So be it trading up, them trading down, the unpredictability of the Thunder, and the fact that the Kings at 4 are very much, trying to win now. Like, I know we predicted Ivy to them in the first segment, but, Ivy and De'Aaron Fox are kind of an awkward fit. I think they, push came to shove and they stay there. I think they have to take Ivy because he's more ready than Sharp, and the Kings clearly want to win now. But the fact that you have a team right behind you that wants to win now, and you have a team in front of you in OKC that no one knows what the hell they're going to do, then to me, you can't take the trade off the table. It's at least possible. And of course, you never know. I mean, there's also possibilities. Maybe some superstar we're unaware of decides they have a crazy situation the next month and for some reason wants to go to Houston. But, I think that's unlikely. I think the odds-on scenario would be you trade up or down a spot.
I think it would be interesting, and now that you're talking about it, I think a guy that can help right now for the Kings is Jabari Smith, and I would not take it away from the Thunder to trade, like if they are onto Sharp or if they are onto Ivy, for them to, and we know their addiction with picks, I would not take it away from them for them to trade from 2 to 4 and the Kings get, I mean, if they can get a good, like a future first from the Kings is like one of the best singular assets in the league, anyways.
Sure.
And I could see something like that happening. Yeah, I think.
I think if the Thunder were high on Sharp or Ivy, I think that's a very obvious trade for them to make at that point because, like
Honestly,
you said, if I think Jabari probably is the most. I'm not going to say the most NBA ready, but definitely the most ready made player that would fit with what the Kings are trying to do, right? Because Sabonis and Banchero, you're going to kind of run into a similar crunch as Şengün, Banchero a little bit, and then obviously they have Fox and Mitchell still there. So I don't think Banchero is really who they would be angling for if they did a trade up. I think it probably would be Jabari, and so I think there's something to that scenario. I think whether it happens or not, I understand the logic of what would go into that.
and it works both ways. Them having so many picks could also make it so they trade up to one if they really like Chet and they think Chet's going one. They have so many picks that it wouldn't be that damaging to their war chest of assets if they spent a pick or two, depending on the quality of them, to trade up to number one. I think to a team like the Rockets, who, while they have a couple of extra picks compared to normal, it's still not that much if you're like trying to stockpile some for a longer contending window. It's definitely a lot harder for a team like us or even the Magic to part with some of those assets than it is for the Thunder who have so many that are like, well, we're gonna have to use them at some time.
Yeah,
Right.
the Thunder are definitely going to hit a critical mass point where it's like we cannot roster all of these picks. So they're going to end up, having to cut guys that are on the roster, which maybe they're fine doing that with who they have currently. Or they're going to have to flood some team with picks so that way they're not having to, draft guys and basically not be able to roster them. So definitely something that needs to be taken into account by the Thunder. I think the Rockets, it's a little bit less in the calculus right now. The one element that I would say that the Rockets would need to consider that in would be if the Rockets were to get in some sort of bidding war against the Thunder for say X insert X star from a disgruntled star from a team, right? Because at that point, unless the player does what Anthony Davis basically did to the Pelicans and say, I'm not going to Oklahoma City, send me to LA, whatever the case may be, Oklahoma City is going to be able to give an overwhelming package for that player whenever that time comes.
Yep.
All right. So is everyone comfortable with trade up, trade down scenarios?
I think so. I think we covered it.
Okay. We said we weren't going to do this, but I think we have a little bit of extra time here. I'd say just do a real quick. Does drafting Paolo Banchero give you any pause about the future of Alperen Şengün on the Rockets? For me, I'll go first since I'm pivoting and answering this question, unprompted. I don't believe it does. I think if you think Banchero is the best prospect left on the board, you take him, and whether the fit with Alperen Şengün is good or not, you let that play out on the court. And if you need to move one and or both of them at some other time, you cross that bridge when you come to it. But I think worrying about that, because this has been a big kind of topic today on Rockets Twitter, so I just kind of wanted to jam this in here. But I don't think you let that come into the calculus. And I don't think drafting Banchero means you have to immediately eject Alperen Şengün from the roster. I think there is a lot of ways that Alperen Şengün can contribute on this roster with Paolo Banchero also here as well. So, Ben, you want to give a
Yeah, I
quick
mean,
answer?
you said it. I am not stressing about that. Alperen Şengün is a nice prospect. There's a reason he was in the middle of the first round and not the top of the first round. You don't let your decision on an asset as premium as number 3 overall be dictated by what the fit may or may not be. And you never really know until these guys start playing in the NBA. Jalen Green was a much better defender, especially the second half of the year, than a lot of people thought based on the scouting report. And I think there's some upside. Our Paulo has talked about what Banchero can do defensively and why some of the scouting reports may be underselling him on that side of the ball. The bottom line, this is no insult to Şengün, but Şengün is just not you have not invested nearly enough in him to where you let a premium asset like number 3, let your decision on that be impacted on how that may or may not fit with Shingun. You can always, you can make roster moves later if that comes down to it. But the bottom line is, again, you don't even know until these guys really start playing in the NBA. So I say, yeah, you've got to do what's best for you at number 3 and worry about all the fit stuff later.
Yeah, to me, the most it can do for you is maybe you don't trade Sengun, but you go and get a big that will theoretically fit with Banchero. You might trade up for one with Mark Williams or Dylan Duran or someone like that. You might do that and have him as a backup center in case it really, really, really doesn't work and you're like in a 30-game losing streak for some reason, and you might just bring them on as so because even with Sengun as the starting center, you could use a different archetype of center as a backup. I could see them doing something like that. I don't think they trade Sengun. I think clearly you give it a year, and then you see. I think, as Ben said, I think Bankero's defense is underrated because the other two are such good defenders. And as we saw with Jalen Green was touted as a way worse defender than what Paulo is at the college level. And at the second half of the season, I would argue that he was our best isolation defender. And even weak side, he wasn't a liability anymore. At least, at the very least, he wasn't. And I think with defense, a lot of it last season was with communication. I posted a clip today of Paulo saying, "Hey, my two biggest strengths are ISO defense and communication on defense, and I'm bad, or I'm not bad, but I'm worse at off-ball defense and pick and roll defense." And yeah, I just think you figure it out later. There's many ways to play defense. You might just not run on rim protector and try to stop dribble penetration a lot more. Who knows? I think you give it a year, you see how it goes, and you make a decision afterwards.
The way that I would sum it up is that with everything that goes into a rebuild, you're considering the asset cost and what you need to get out of that pick. With what you gave up for Shingun and where he was drafted, you certainly want him to be a rotation player. But in terms of, is he more than that? Is he a legitimate starter every year? Is he potentially an all-star down the line? That's a bonus. You don't plan for that scenario. You take that as a happy bonus if it happens and, run with that. Whereas with an asset at number 3 overall, you are hoping, as Rafael Stone said in the post-lottery press conference, to get potentially a cornerstone, a foundational piece. And you can't, Shingun had a nice rookie season, but there's nothing to make you think, from what we saw Shingun's a rookie, that, hey, we don't really need a star from pick number 3 because we're already set. No, they need a star at pick number 3. That's why this draft and the lottery was so important. And so you've got to do whatever you maximize your chances of getting. I know we're partial to Banchero. Others have made arguments for Chat, for Jabari, even for Sharp and Ivy. But the bottom line is you've got to maximize the asset value of this pick and your chances of getting a star. Count on Shingun being, basically what you expected when you drafted number 16 overall. And if Shingun ends up more than that, and you get to eventually have a discussion about, okay, how are we truly optimizing star A and star B, and do they work together? Take that as a good problem down the line. Yeah. It's not something that you need to worry about right now.
And I'll leave everyone on this note. If we were to draft Paolo Banchero, we have the additional bonus of no one else on the roster has number 5 right now. I'm sure everyone remembers the Daniel House, Jalen Green, fracas from last year. If we draft Jabari, we have to cut Eric Gordon immediately, so that way, Jabari can have number 10 still. So no one wants to do that.
What's Chet's number?
What is Chet's number? That's a good question.
It is 34.
Yeah, he's not getting 34.
Yeah, no. So he's already not looking good.
We can't just unretire.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say this. A few people went after House. I understand why House burned his bridges with Houston fans after the stunt he pulled in the bubble. But nobody, in the scenario where Jabari is in Houston, nobody better be going after Eric Gordon on Twitter. That guy is arguably a top 15 all-time Rocket. So I don't care how much you like Jabari. No, leave Eric Gordon alone. Do not treat Eric Gordon in the summer of 22 like people treated Daniel House Jr. in the summer of 2021.
Consummate professional and meme master Eric Gordon will not be disrespected. There we go. So, all right. When we come back, we're going to do a little fun segment about the Astros. So stick around for that. We will be right back. And moving into our final segment here on Launchpad Podcast with our guest, Ben DuBose, who, convenient to this segment, is wearing his Astros hat currently. We're going to be talking a little bit about Paulo
Yeah.
Paolo's journey into becoming an Astros fan. You know, there's been a lot of controversy about you becoming an Astros fan. There we go. We got the Bregman bobblehead. So, like I was saying, there's been a lot of controversy about you becoming an Astros fan. So, we're going to talk a little bit about
Yeah.
how that came about, and then we're going to educate you on a little bit of
Yes.
baseball knowledge. So, first, go ahead and tell the people how you became an Astros fan. Obviously, the Rockets, I'm sure, play a fairly critical role in that, but I'll let you get into that.
Yeah. So this happened actually the first time I noticed that the Astros existed, where it was, and this is why I never forget this game, when the Astros lost the World Series against the Nationals, Game 7. We were
It's a
playing
very
the
painful time,
Wizards. We were
unfortunately.
playing the Wizards at the same time.
Mm.
I remember that. I remember watching both of them on a
Remember what game
laptop
it
and the
was? It
TV.
was a
Yeah.
game with Harden and Russ where they were going off, and the game ended like 150, and we won. And I remember thinking, "Ah, man, we won and they lost," and I'm like, "We should probably switch this around." But whatever.
Yes.
Would have been nice. Yeah.
Well, when I got into Twitter, right, um, I used to see Ben all the time tweeting about the Astros. I'm like, what's this about? Like, why they winning all the time? Like they're like really good in the playoffs. Let me look into it. And so the way sports works it's probably how it works everywhere. You usually are a fan of the team your parents are a fan of, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that a thing? So
or where you're where you're born and raised. 'Cause there's a lot of people that in the U.S. that maybe from somewhere else. Especially in Houston, there's a lot of people that they move here from other countries for oil or whatever the case may be, oil jobs, I should say. And those people are first generation Houstonians. Like myself, my dad is not from Houston. My dad's from Pittsburgh. So I was born and raised in Houston. So I have all of the Houston teams. But yeah, stuff like that.
So basically, the way it was is, well, I'm not from any city in Houston, and I was like, this like Rockets Twitter is basically my American sports family. So everybody was rooting for the Astros. Like, let me give this a shot, and it was the playoffs already, and so it was like the most what people say it's the more entertaining version of baseball. And I was just like tweeting about it. I didn't understand anything. I remember I had Grant and Brad on my DMs all the time because I was always asking questions, and people thought it was funny that I was like my innocence was funny, and so I was like, sure, like there's nothing else to do, so let's just watch this, I guess. And they kept winning, and I was like, well, it's a lot easier to root for a team if they're winning, and so it was mostly rooting for a team because, well, everybody's rooting for them, and I like these people. I want these people to be happy, so let me root for them as well. So the positive reactions from Rockets Twitter about the Astros was what meant me wanting to see them more times. Was what made me root for them in the first place. So that was basically how I got into it.
Yeah, and by the way, I'm gonna push back on all the idiots that I've seen on Houston sports Twitter that try and act like Paulo's bandwagoning. For starters, the last 2 years, the easy thing to do would be to talk shit about the Astros like everybody else does, and of course, it's all nonsense. The sign stealing scandal is the most overblown controversy of our era. I mean, the only reason why this is a big deal is because the two quote unquote wronged fan bases. And I use wronged in air quotes because number one, they had their own system. Number two, every study, and there's tons of them, shows that the system that the Astros had was largely ineffective. And quite frankly, it may have hurt them more than helped. Certainly was not responsible for them winning, which you can also see by their historic success in the years 2019 and onward. If the Astros had beaten, the Royals and the Rockies, two teams like that, this would be basically nothing. It's just because, and we see this all the time. It's no different than NBA Twitter, how people just coalesce around one idea and it just eggs everybody else on. And in baseball, the markets that felt wrong, the Yankees and the Dodgers have such a huge following that it just sort of, they lead the way and everybody else is like, oh, they're doing this and I should hop on. And the obvious proof of it, of course, is Jose Altuve, who did not use the system at all, is sort of one of the ultimate good guys in sports. But to this day, he gets the most grief of everyone else, not because of what he did, but because of this wild ass buzzer theory that John Boy put out there. And, that's been largely debunked. It's not credible. Yet, you know, people just took it as fact because that's how we run in our sort of social media society today. So the reason I bring up all of those examples, that's when Paolo, was making sort of his conversion from Rockets Reddit to like Rockets Twitter. And so it would have been very easy to sort of jump on the national bandwagon. So for people in Houston to call anybody a bandwagoner that's not from this city, that's supporting this team the last couple of years, that is nonsense. To have somebody that's not from Houston to have their back, I think that's, it speaks volumes. Even though they're winning, even though they are winning, they are still, the most hated team in American sports right now, which it's stupid, but that's the reality. And sometimes, perception does become reality. And that's, so I give Paolo all the respect in the world for dealing with all the idiots on Twitter and all the stuff that comes from, supporting the quote unquote cheaters. I roll my eyes, when I say that, but that's the world that we're living in, at least on social media. So I give Paolo a ton of credit. And then as far as his journey, I think the most interesting thing, Paolo, we can talk about rules and, he's had some hilarious questions about, why don't these guys, my favorite one is, why don't these guys bunt every time? Because it looks so perfect when it works. And it's like, well, it's really freaking hard to, execute a perfect bunt and to put it down. And of course, some of it works really well when guys are shifted a certain way. If you did it every time, well, then they position themselves differently and so on and so forth. But the biggest thing that I've noticed that's sort of challenging for Paolo, and it is interesting for anyone getting into baseball that's an NBA first fan, is how different the contract structure is. Because in the NBA, there's a lot of player movement, but between, A, how valuable the stars are, and B, the fact that, there's a salary cap to the league, the Rockets are going to keep Jalen Green for his career if he wants to be in Houston. It's that simple. Assuming that he continues on the all-star path that I think we all believe that he's on and stays healthy, all that stuff. The money will work itself out. Whereas in baseball, you can have a guy, Carlos Correa, the perfect example, that lives and breathes, is everything Houston. And even though I've talked a lot of shit about, Jim Crane the last couple of months and, the slight step back in payroll, look, they're still a top 10 payroll in the game, and they've been borderline top 5 the last 3 or 4 years. They spend a decent amount of money, and Carlos Correa clearly wanted to stay, and yet they still couldn't work it out. And it's sort of the perfect storm in baseball of, number one, there's no salary cap. So these true stars have theoretically unlimited leverage because they can say, oh, some teams are willing to go, way past the salary cap. We've seen the Dodgers do that the last few years, and now the Mets. And then the other factor that plays into these considerations is that the young guys in baseball, especially the first 3 years before they hit arbitration, are paid so low. There is a bigger gap in baseball than any other sport when it comes to, let's say the middle class production. Teams and owners are getting smarter. They can replace that internally incredibly cheap with guys that come up from the minors. And so it almost prices some of the veteran stars out because it's like, the common example, and this is before Paolo became a fan of the Astros, but Don, you'll remember, Evan Gattis was the DH for the championship team in 2017.
Yeah.
Or he was sort of a part-time DH with Carlos Beltran. Roll my eyes when I say that because everybody knows the stuff that Beltran did. But Gattis was a solid player. Now, he didn't have a ton of positional versatility. He could play catcher, could play first base, but he reliably had an OPS of 750 to 800 every year, which is slightly above average. He had decent power, could hit 25, 30 home runs in a year. A perfectly capable hitter. Yet, because he didn't have a lot of positional value and he was good but not great, he basically got forced into retirement at 30 or 31 because no one was willing to pay him when they felt like they could get a lot of that production from a very cheap minor league guy. And of course, the minor leagues in Major League Baseball are so much bigger than they are the G League and the NBA for a fraction of the price. And so the complicating thing for guys like Paolo is, you form a loyalty to some of these players that you see every single day. And there's so many games. That's the thing, 162 games. Even the NBA, which I feel like it's a lot, baseball, you double that. And then if you go on long playoff runs like the Astros have done for 5 straight years now and hopefully counting, you form a bond. Yet these veteran players, be it, if it's a middle class, they may just get priced out altogether by young guys coming up. Or if it's, a superstar, even if you have a respectable payroll like the Astros do, you may not be able to keep them because of many of those same factors, and there's no upward limit to payrolls. It makes it harder to feel the sense of confidence that these guys are truly going to be there. And not saying that the NBA is league loyalty. It's absolutely not. Players in the NBA move around all the time, but it's different because that's the player's choice. So if you're a fan, you feel like, hey, if I can bond with this player and the vibes are really good between, Jalen Green and the Houston fan base, the money is going to work itself out. The Rockets are going to pay Jalen Green the max, and he's going to be here, assuming he stays on that trajectory, as long as he wants to be here. And from a fan standpoint, it's sort of like, from your perspective, it's in control. Whereas in MLB, it's not. And I think that's one of the more interesting things I've seen Paolo sort of coming around lately is, and then also there's the arbitration thing. Like once they get to, after the first couple of years, then the player and team are basically pitted against each other in negotiating before the season. And sometimes they actually literally go to like, a courtroom type setting where you have an arbitrator that decides, is the player right or is the team? And they're literally arguing against the other, the player or the team arguing why the player deserves less money than what he is arguing for, which is sort of makes for an awkward relationship when that's your employer. Just the economics are very different. And I would say that to me seems like what Paulo has sort of struggled with a little bit. And it's just sort of like baseball is a very different economic system than the NBA.
You're on mute.
Sorry. So the way I look at it is, if the player's going to leave in the NBA, then he's likely going to request out. And if the player's requesting out, then you kind of turn, like you as a fan, you kind of turn against the player because, like,
sure,
if he doesn't want to be here, I don't want him to be here. Like, fuck off. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, and you feel, and you feel like you had your shot to kind of control the situation too.
Yeah. To me, the biggest thing was, well, young players in the MLB already aren't, at least from what I watched, the Astros, they aren't 19, 20 years old. They're like 23, 24. And I'm like,
yeah, because it takes a lot longer to get to the professional level in baseball.
Right.
Yeah,
and when they finally become players, you have so little time to bond with them, and then like, at least I only watched for a year or something, but I thought Jordan and Tucker were really recent additions that they got, and then now
they are fairly recent. I mean,
and
last 2 or 3 years.
They have
basically came on the scene in 2019. Tucker had a cameo in 2018, but basically both of them are 2019 guys.
Right, and so I'm looking at them like, well, and in like 1 or 2 years they're going to be in arbitration, and it's not like I understand people have explained to me that okay, it's really likely that they'll stay anyways, but I'm like, it's just kind of like restricted free agency, right? And it's like,
yeah,
well, they're probably gonna stay, but they could leave. I mean, it doesn't feel like it's a certainty that they're going to stay. It's just weird because I thought those were supposed to be the young guys, and I think it also comes a little bit with how much is superstars valued in the NBA, where you can only have 5 players on the floor, versus the MLB where you have like, I don't know how many. You have
9
9
in the field.
So you got 9, and then even the pitchers who are there like every game, well, they rotate throughout the week, so even they are like not. You're not gonna have a James Harden, right? That's mostly what I'm trying to say.
Yeah,
the guy you would have that's most comparable to like a James Harden would be probably Mike Trout in LA, and he still hasn't made the playoffs yet, right?
But
he did like a long time ago, like 2014, I think. It's been a long time.
Yeah,
but he can't win by himself is mostly what I mean,
Yeah.
So that's the weird part. And
but
yes, it's the effort to stay that. Thank God Peña's coming. I mean, because I was having this discussion and they're like, well, the report that just came out that they might not want to extend Tucker. I'm like, why would you not extend Tucker? He's a really good player. He wants to extend him. Like, that's how it happens in the NBA. But like, and then people told me, well, Jordan might be the same thing because in like a short time, and then people told me, oh, and Verlander might not take his player off, and I'm like, why is everybody leaving?
Yeah, the baseball economics, are very tricky, and most teams, everybody except for the Dodgers and I guess the Mets now, do live in fear of the luxury tax. Now, luxury tax is a little bit higher than it is in the NBA, but whereas, we talk about in the NBA, will teams go over the luxury tax or not? more of them do in the NBA than Major League Baseball. Major League Baseball, it's a pretty big deterrent. So yeah, you do have to sort of be careful with the money, especially if you have a team as good as the Astros. But just sort of bring it full circle, and less business and more just fun. Number one, the Astros are fun because they win a lot of games.
Before you say that, let me just say something because I'm
Go
going
ahead.
to forget if we change subjects. You talk about the cleaning thing, and I'll provide you my lens as someone who just comes from a completely different background, who doesn't understand what's supposed to be normal in baseball.
Yeah.
Looking from the outside, what I think is, well, if you're able to cheat, why wouldn't you? Like, if everybody can cheat, then what's wrong with, like, it's so easy to do. Like, did you just make signs and everybody on TV sees it? And I'm like, well, why would you not steal them? Like,
Yeah, the fact that they didn't have the pitch com before, yeah, it's ridiculous.
I don't understand. Like, why not? Like, it's
well, the answer is a lot of teams were. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, and that's come out
Really,
since.
An example would be in soccer. Well, what would be the only thing that would be kind of equivalent to cheating, other than bribing a ref? Which, I mean, that's very clearly wrong. It would be wrong in the MLB as well. It would be like if you had like a tape recorder on like the locker rooms, or a tape recorder on a training session.
Or if you had cameras set up on a training session. I don't know if you ever heard about Spygate in football.
But it's really weird
American
because
football.
It's so exposed that I don't understand why it's wrong to do it if everybody can see it. That was my thing looking at, like,
the whole flip on it was that if you're stealing signs, that's fine. You can steal signs all day. But if you use technology to do it, then it's bad, unless it's Apple Watches, and then no one cares if it's Apple Watches.
Well, and it also plays into, like, on a broader societal level, it also plays into everybody's sort of pre-existing fear that we're all going to be replaced by robots. Like, there's a lot of people that are very scared of what technology can do. And it sort of plays on that underlying, like, a lot of people are just very wary about new age tech, and so I think that's what this sort of did. But, like, the one thing about the cheating that I wish everyone understood more, first off, everybody in Major League Baseball knew this all along. Like, the pitcher for the White Sox in the infamous, like, John Boy video, figured it out during the game in September of 2017. Jeff Passan, who's now the big MLB guy for ESPN, he used to be with Yahoo, wrote about the trash can system in October of 2018. The only thing that changed in the fall of 2019 was, Mike Fiers being, upset enough, and I'm guessing it's because the Astros absolutely blew him up in September of 2019, to go public and confirm it. Otherwise, I mean, it lives in the same sign stealing as everybody else. We know what happened. We just didn't have an on-the-record confirmation from a player, and who knows why he did that. It is what it is. But yeah, the fact
he was in Oakland around all those Steph Curry fans, and they were like, "You gotta stick it to Houston right now because we don't like James Harden." That's my prevailing belief on how it happened.
Yeah, and of course the proof is in the pudding. And oh my God, I'm laughing. Jose Siri, what are you doing? Jose Siri is a likable player, but he does some really stupid things from time to time.
Didn't he steal a base?
Well, no, he got caught between third and home. He should have stopped at third, and he got caught off, and it ended the inning, him trying to go home. But the reason I bring all this up, all of this is like performance theater, like the stuff in the spring training of 2020 when it was at a fever pitch, like from Aaron Judge. Dude, you guys knew this for years. Everybody in this. So all of this, like, acting enraged, everyone in the league already knew. And quite frankly, the reason nobody broke it wasn't that big of a deal because everybody else was doing it. Now, they might have been doing it a different way, but it was 100% happening. Did the Astros go a step further? Maybe. Or maybe they didn't. We will never know.
You know what that reminds me of?
The funny thing is, like, people are always like, "Oh yeah, y'all cheated because you used technology," but it's like everyone was using the replay room.
Yeah.
The technology that the Astros used that was so advanced was banging on a trash can. It's like, that's our technology, is the trash can.
Yeah, I know. It's pretty hilarious when you think about it. But no, like, the whole thing, it's like everyone knew, the White Sox pitcher knew in 2017. The substance of it was known enough in 2018 that Passan wrote about it for Yahoo. So the fact that, everything that happened in the 2019 offseason and early 2020 was total performance theater. Everyone involved already knew. And, you have these people acting like, this is just shocking information that is just stunning. And No, you knew this all along. You didn't really say anything because it really wasn't that big of a deal.
Just like the
It
nothing
just sort of
burger
fit with the
of
culture of the
the
time. And, technology got sort of out of hand in Major League Baseball once they introduced, the replay room. And we talked about the boundaries or lack thereof there. But yeah,
that
so
also doesn't
much
make
of
any
it,
sense. So
so much
two
of
things.
it was just, performance theater and, players, teams, executives, they saw the public outrage because the public didn't have this on the record and basically said, hey, and the Yankees GM, Brian Cashman, is the king of this. I can use this as a get out of fail free card. I didn't lose because I didn't build a good enough team. I lost because the Astros cheated me. And that's what so many of these teams, players, other GMs are doing. And like I said, it's so transparent because the time to get mad was when it was happening in 2018. Not years later when all that comes out is a player confirming what everybody in the game already knew. I mean, it's just silly. And of course, it had nothing to do in the postseason because number one, I mean, it's too damn loud to hear anything like that in Minute Maid Park. And
Yeah.
two, everybody in the postseason uses multiple sign sequences anyway. That's why the Astros Dodgers games of the World Series took freaking forever. Everybody on both sides. Brian McCann talked about it right after the Astros won the World Series. The Astros were changing all of their signs because they feared the Dodgers doing the same thing. So it's a total non-story as far as the postseason. It's just people wanting an excuse to feel better about themselves. And that's what's disappointing because at the end of the day, the Astros are a really fun team. Jose Altuve, one of the most likable guys, fun guys in sports. And, to bring it full circle, what I think, and I've had two podcasts with, my new logger line, one with Gretchen Shearer, president of the Rockets, today with Craig Ackerman, voice of the Rockets. Both of them made the same point. The success of the Astros and the culture that's built in Houston, sustainable success to where even a guy like Carlos Correa can leave, and the internal development, you bring up Jeremy Pena and he just starts, playing like one of the best shortstops in baseball. That has built something in this fan base and in this community where they just believe. And it's especially true when it's internal development. And that's what the Rockets are trying to do in this era. It's not like the Rockets are just trying to go out and buy a super team and do it the way the Celtics did in like 2008 by getting Jalen Green last year, by hopefully getting, a star this year. Maybe it's Paolo Banchero. We'll see what happens in 2023. The Rockets are hoping they build something internally and develop it. And I think that's something that fans will be much more willing to buy in on and believe in this process thanks to the Astros. And so that's where I think there's synergies is that you have the Astros doing their thing the last 10 years, and it makes it all the more easier for people to buy in on what the Rockets are doing right now.
Paulo, close this out.
Close
Get
this
your
out.
last points off. Get your last points off here, and then close this out.
The way I see it is like, if it's about how you cheat, it doesn't really make much sense. My other thing is, one thing that doesn't make, so from an outside perspective, that doesn't make any sense in baseball is why is that an umpire in the back of the plate where you could just have someone looking at every pitch. There's literally a square on the screen for the people on TV. How is this not automatic yet? Like,
again,
coming out in favor of robo-umps. I did not expect this.
Yes, people have weird opinions about technology. That's sort of the undercurrent to all of this. People have, people's fear of technology makes them do some irrational things at times.
Don't think it's because it's a foreign sport. The sport most dearest to my heart that I grew up with is football, and I was one of the biggest supporters of VAR ever. I always thought, offside rules are so clear-cut objective. How is this not automatic yet? Like, we have the technology for this. To me, sports should be not about the show, but about the competitiveness. And if you want to raise the competitiveness, technology will help you. And that's, to me, that's the bottom line. I don't care about any sort of magic of the game that comes from you having to play mind games with the refs or setting your own zone or whatever. I've heard all that. To me, this just doesn't make sense. If you want the rules to be enforced, that increases competitiveness and competitive integrity. And to me, that's how it should be. And this is kind of a strong opinion for someone who hasn't watched baseball for long. But I have the same opinion about football, who's my childhood sport. That being said, I guess I'll close out by saying the other thing about the Astros is, well, they're so good, and then the personalities on the team are so unique.
Yes.
I follow the Rockets, right? And there are some unique personalities there, like 2, 3 guys that you like for who they are. The Astros are so like maybe it's because I'm new to the sport and I'm learning on the fly, but they have so many gimmicks. I don't know. It's so like Altuve is really small, so he doesn't look like an athlete, but he's really good. So that's like, and he's really nice. So that's a thing in itself. Jeremy Payne is like this cool rookie that just came to replace like the father of the team, and he's really like his mannerisms are so like he's the cool guy, and so he's so easy to like. Um, and then you have Jordan, who's like this badass like giant that just hits the ball really really far. It's like what he does. Like it, I I I, I remember a lot more home run from. So when, for example, when I look at Jordan, I remember home runs. When I look at Michael Brantley, I remember contact, and
Yeah,
it's like the opposite thing. So it's like
and
they're
yeah, and I'll add very quickly, on top of the obvious Houston angle, one of the things I really love about Paolo's journey with the Astros, it reminds me of just how fun this team actually is, because the last couple of years there's been so much negativity because of the whole aftermath of the sign stealing and people trying to make this, public enemy number one all over the world. The reality is this is, not just a Houston team full of internally developed prospects like we talked about. This is an incredibly fun team with so many fun players, so many personalities, and hopefully the Rockets are being built the same way. I think especially the rookie class, those guys are so fun. But yeah, like watching Paolo journey with the Rockets, it sort of reminds me too of just how special this group of Astros is, and counter to the conventional narrative, why this is such a unique time to be an Astros fan.
Oh, I have the game. Speaking of the Astros on the side monitor, and the ref just got hit with a ball in the face or in the helmet. It was really. But what other thing I
That's
was going to
funny.
say, even going down the lineup, like people hate Maldi. I love Maldi. He reminds me of PJ Tucker a lot. I always remember what
You can
he's.
see that.
I always remember that when he got like really close to the plate and forced a walk in last year's playoffs. I don't know if you remember that. Like he hugged
Mhm.
the zone. It was so I thought that was like ultimate like tough guy, like hustle guy, like defensive guy mentality. And I always think of Bregman as like he's like I don't know if it's because he was blonde, but he reminds me of like this your typical like star guy. Like he's average height. Like he doesn't have any like I feel like I look at him as a really all around player. Like he's not athletic. Like he's I would say fairly athletic running the bases. So it's not like Jordan is like really good at hitting, but he's worse at running. It's not that athletic. So I
Yeah.
feel like Bregman is like the all around guy. Like that I don't there's no defining trait, but he's really good. I feel like that's also unique for the Astros. And then Tucker, for some reason, is like I feel like he always comes through when they need him most, and I remember him for the defensive plays because he goes and gets the balls from God knows where, like when they're basically home runs already. And is there anybody else that I'm forgetting? Oh, uh, like how could I forget? I'm forgetting about Verlander. Reminds me of Chris Paul so much. Like it's so weird.
If Verlander's
He
hamstring goes out, it's all your fault, man.
he does
Yeah,
because
I don't put that
he
evil on him.
he always looks so in control. Like he makes the hitters look like fools. Like to me, that it's really funny when they swing and they don't hit anything. Like they swing really hard and don't hit anything. And Verlander gets that all the time. It feels like he's constantly playing with the hitter. Maybe and I've never watched Lance McCullers. People say the best things about him, but I don't think there's any pitcher on the Astros that really even comes close to the level of control. I feel like Verlander is always in
No,
control.
McCullers' weakness is, well, I mean, he's good control of his emotions, but in terms of his actual control of the strike zone, that can. His stuff is very, very good, but command can be an issue. Verlander is the ultimate in terms of always in control, and the way he, can move around the zone, very rarely walks people. Yeah, McCullers is good. He's not Verlander.
The first comparison that made me think of Chris Paul was y'all remember when Garuba's welcome to the NBA moment was getting nutmegged by Chris Paul? Like how Chris Paul has these like teachable moments with these young guys coming in. I feel like I don't know. I get that vibe from Verlander, and then I guess I'll close it out by one of the relievers that's been really growing on me is Montero. I don't know why.
Oh
Like I feel
yeah,
like he always gets the job
his
done,
stuff is filthy, by the way.
and he throws really really fast, and so I also like he's like probably my favorite reliever right now.
All right. So I
Rafael
think on
Montero reference on the Launchpad podcast. We never thought we'd ever see that, man.
Definitely not from Paulo. But all right, that's gonna do it for us today. As always, you can find us at Clutch City CR on Twitter. In the description there of the bio, there's the YouTube, the Apple Podcast, and Spotify links. Again, want to thank everyone that subscribed on YouTube, watched on YouTube. You all done a great job. Keep the YouTube comments coming. We've done a better job about responding to those. So thank you for all the YouTube comments. You can find me on Twitter at Don Knock. You can find Paolo on Twitter at.
Oh, sorry, at Paulo Alves.
God,
I was
too busy
looking at
watching
the
the game.
game. I'm sorry,
Okay,
I
there
was
you go.
tuned out.
I'm just gonna
At Paul,
do it for you next time.
at
So you just
Paulo
lock
Alves,
in.
at
There
Paulo
you
Alves
go.
NBA. That's PAULOALVES NBA. Everything I
And
do. No, I've got to do my host
I
shtick.
know. Go for
You
it.
can't stop me. You can't stop me.
I could stop
Uh,
you.
Everything I do from podcasts to live shows on Twitter Spaces will find itself linked on there. You ruined my vibe, dude.
I threw off your groove. All right, Ben, tell the people where they can find your stuff
Yeah.
and your new podcast.
Yeah,
with
Ben DuBose on
Craig.
Twitter, the Rocket Swear on Twitter, and then new podcast is a Logger Line. You can find it at sports790.com or just on my Twitter page, where we'll have the episode with Craig Ackerman out on Friday.
Perfect. So that's going to do it for us today. Until next time, everyone, be safe and go Rockets.